here today. Many of us know him, adjunct professor. He does have associate graduate faculty status with the University of Guelph as well. He's a graduate here of our program, so many of us do know him, and he's going to speak today in capacity for agriculture and rural innovation. I asked him if I need to give you a lot of insight about himself. He said he'll be doing that in his presentation and not to worry about it. We do have till 4:30. We'd like to wrap it up and give you at least 30 minutes for a question period if there are questions. Or 45 minutes, 50 minutes is what he said it would take. And I'll allow him to take the floor. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the hiring committee giving me this opportunity to talk about my work and my vision. I have organized my presentation into 4 parts. The first part is about my own background as an emerging scholar and practitioner, and I will try to present my true self, authentic self. And the second part is about my completed and ongoing work. I won't talk all the details, but I have 3 very specific examples. The first example is from India, the second one from Nepal, and the third from Canada. So these will be the showcase of my completed and ongoing work. In the third part, in the third section, I'll be talking about some indication of my future research interest. So based on what I have done so far, so where it could lead to future research interest. And the final one is about translating my research into inspirational teaching and learning opportunities. So I was raised in a 2-acre family farm in the Himalayas. When I talk about extension, capacity development, innovation, I usually refer to some of the activities my parents had done when I was a child. And some of those activities I had hard time to understand. The one activity I still remember, my dad, he used to buy food grains during night so that nobody in our community knew it. As a child, I find that strange. Why my dad had to buy food grain during the night? Any clue? It's hard to understand. So when I look at those activities, now in the 21st century, you know, we used to produce everything on our farm except kerosene oil to light our house so that we could do homework, and salt and clothes that we could not produce. So those are the things we had to buy. Other than that, we were kind of self-sufficient family farm. And in bad years, when we have a drought or flood or some disease outbreak, we had to buy food. And food self-sufficiency was linked to social dignity, family pride, and that was kind of agrarian virtue of our community. So we had to produce our own food to be virtuous in the community. So that was kind of society I was grew up. So before I move on, I'd like to ask you a question so that I can better connect with you. So how many of you were raised on a family farm? And how many of your parents were raised in family farm? Yeah, we have quite a mixed audience here, and then I can easily connect my own experience with many of you. So with this kind of background, raising on a family farm, you know, I went to agriculture school for my undergrad. My passion to help my own community. So that was my passion. And I completed my all degrees from agricultural universities, and those schools were all sedate type schools, I would say. And when I first heard about sedate, I thought, this is where I belong. I have been to agricultural universities throughout all my career, in my all degrees, and then all the schools I have been to is something like sedate, extension school, development school within agriculture college. And that way I feel that I have lifetime commitment in food and agriculture, food and extension. In my PhD, I look at agricultural innovation system. That is one of the latest and most recent thinking in agricultural research and extension literature. So I have a very extensive network of academics and practitioners from universities, from UN organizations, from civil society organizations, farming communities. So that helped me to remain in the cutting edge of research in agricultural innovation system. So for example, after finishing my PhD, I worked with a colleague at the University of Manchester in the UK. In that work, I look at the use of mobile phone in climate change adaptation, agricultural adaptation. And when I was with Queen's University, I look at use of broadband in rural and regional development. I also went to Arizona State University for a short course, and that gave me opportunity to learn about new and emerging technologies, governance of new and emerging technologies. That included GMOs, big data, nanotechnology, synthetic biology. So that was the kind of work I was engaged in Arizona State University. So, you know, this kind of exposure gave me to understand how people from other disciplines and other sectors understand extension. So extension itself has a legacy of over 100 years, but people understand this concept in a diverse ways. And then I had to explain them the core meaning of extension, and then, you know, the passion I have in this field. So that gave me the skill to talk to a broader, diverse audience. So agricultural innovation system thinking identified at least two major paradigm shifts in agricultural research and extension. So the first paradigm shift is from adoption of technology to adaptation of the technology. So technology adoption paradigm involves engagement of end users in the technology development process, so that the technology we develop would be suitable to local ecological, social and cultural contexts. So that was a challenge to linear technology transfer approach, where scientists, they develop the technologies assuming that that would work in different contexts. And sometimes that worked, sometimes that didn't. Example is the transfer of technology paradigm influenced the increase in productivity during mid-20th century, including its influence in green evolution. But that increase in productivity also came with some social and environmental cost. For example, we have seen that in many intensively cultivated areas, we have seen problems of fertilizer runoff, nitrate leaching, loss of biodiversity, chemical toxicity to non-target species. So those are some of the environmental problems. And then we have also seen that the transfer of technology paradigm could not help some of the farmers, those farmers who are smallholder family farms and cultivate marginal lands. So these were the two social and environmental impact we could discuss from the transfer of technology paradigm. The second paradigm shift is from public research and extension to pluralistic research and extension. So this is basically open up the opportunity for private sectors, non-profit sectors to engage in agricultural research and extension. So extension is not just the work of the public sector. It could be done by private and non-public sector as well. And that was the time we had seen the emergence of private extension providers. As a future thinker, I can clearly tell you that a third paradigm shift is coming. I would call that third paradigm shift as a critical innovation system paradigm that would involve a differentiation of incremental innovation and transformational innovation. Are we doing some sort of small changes to innovate, or is it some sort of transformational innovation that would make a huge difference? So I would like to present my three examples. Those examples would give an early indication of those anticipated paradigm shift. The third paradigm shift I can anticipate. So that is about critical innovation systems. So my first example is from India, and it's about mango. So India is the center of diversity of mangoes. They have over 1,300 mango varieties, including wild varieties, and about 30 varieties are commercially grown. And India is also at various advanced stages in terms of technological development. So they have well-established public extension system. They have well-established agricultural university system, and they have very connected network of extension providers from the local level. And from this right diagram here, you can see that this is the nuclear research facility at the Acharya Rangareddy Agricultural University in Andhra Pradesh. This is the state agricultural university, just like University of Guelph here. And they were doing experiment to determine doses of cobalt ray radiation to irradiate mangoes, and that was particularly to export mangoes to US. So United States, they want Indian mangoes only after they irradiate to remove bugs and germs. So that was the requirement. And this technology is itself controversial. In Canada, we have only 3 commodities that are permitted to irradiate. They are they are onion, potatoes, and ground beef. So my argument here is that India is competent in technological development. They have very favorable agroecological conditions to grow mangoes. Still, they have not been successful to take a momentum in the international market. So one example is they are lagging behind other mango growing countries. So the graph here, this one, the right graph is about mango yield in Southeast Asian countries. The red line, the mango yield is going up, whereas the Indian mango yield, that has been on the decline for last several decades. So they have the favorable agricultural condition, they have advanced technology. So what's going on here? What is missing here? So what they could have done to improve the situation? So when Indian stakeholders were in trouble to manage their mango sector, people from Natural Resources Institute from the University of Greenwich in the UK, they came down to India with a DFID-funded project, a first project funded by Department for International Development in the UK. And they asked Indian stakeholders, would you be willing to collaborate on this project on crop post-harvest? And Indian stakeholders were more than happy. So we don't know what to do with our situation, and then we have external support. And that project was conducted in 3 phases. In the first phase, they did scoping study. So they conducted the scoping study of different export destinations. Look at the export regulations, tariff and non-tariff barriers. So they identify certain markets in the UK, European countries, Middle East, US. For example, if they were to send mangoes to Japan, they had to do vapor treatment. Japanese are very cautious about fruit flies. So without eradication of fruit flies, they wouldn't take Indian mangoes. They had the import ban for Indian mangoes for over 20 years. And in the second stage of that project, they actually developed the processing facilities in Andhra Pradesh, and they sent experimental shipment of mangoes to the UK to look at how it works. And then when mangoes were arrived in the UK, only 30% of the mangoes were good enough to eat. 70%, shocking loss in transport. And those shipments were sent in consignment, and farmers won't get payment unless their mangoes are sold in the market. So that was a very serious loss for farmers. And only in the third phase of the project, they initiated some sort of discussion around institutional pluralism. So how they could bring different stakeholders together to improve the situation. So that was the time they began their discussion around innovation systems. So we have different stakeholders, but how we can bring them together and learn and innovate. So how we could do institutional innovation to address the problem that we have in India. And at the meantime, farmers were also doing their own experiment. So farmers established their own farmers association. They call it Vijaya Fruits and Vegetable Growers Association. And the goal of that association is basically two. One is to get better price for their mangoes. The second one is to get access to technical advice for their members. So better access. They are working as some sort of intermediary for their members. And the diagram here on the right, they also developed their own brand name for the mangoes from their region, from Vijayawada region. That was called Vijaya Sun Gold. So this brand was used without any legal protection. Anyone from Vijayawada region could use this brand to sell their mangoes. so that consumers know the mangoes are from Vijayawada region. So that was kind of geographic indication of the produce, where they come from. And farmers went further and did some experiment. So one of the farmer who worked with that Vijay association, he was keen to solve the problem. And then he tried to use those processing facilities that are developed for export. So those processing facilities that were developed were heavily subsidized for export promotion. So that was not for domestic mango supply. And farmers who are interested for export, they also had to register with the government that they had the intention of exporting mangoes so that they could get some subsidies. So smallholder farmers were excluded from that subsidy measure. And this particular farmer from that Vijay association, he was using that processing facilities subsidized for mango export to supply Indian mangoes to Indian domestic market. And then initially, many people thought that no, that was not acceptable. So that facility is for export, why you are using that for domestic? How you were able to influence the government officers to give you that preferential access to those facilities? And the logic is that India has 1.3 billion population, and then Indian middle class is growing. They are looking for premium quality mangoes, and they are willing to pay the premium of better quality mangoes. So that particular farmer argued that we don't have to look for export market. We have billion people here in India, and the Indian supermarkets, they are looking for premium quality mangoes. So Indians, the growing middle class, they develop those kind of habit of shopping in supermarket. So that was kind of turning point, and then with that exploration of the domestic market, farmers had more accessible to those domestic market that was less stringent in terms of quarantine regulation, and they also export some regional market. So that was more accessible for them. And they also look at some ways to promote value-added products and organic and free-trade mangoes. So that was the unintended consequences of that defeat project. So unintended positive consequences. Now, I would like to move to my second example. It's from Nepal. So Nepal has three major agroecological zones. Plains in the south, bordering to India, mountains in the north, you can see from the left diagram there, and then hills in between. And when I map those agricultural research stations in the country, you can clearly see that most of the research stations are in the southern plains. There are very few research stations in the northern ecological region. In collaboration with USC Canada, a non-profit organization based in Ottawa, and RL Food Institute here at the University of Guelph, and Nepalese NGOs, we conducted household surveys of over 1,500 households from three agroecological zones. And then when I look at that data, we found that the mountain farmers, family farmers, they are the ones who maintain highest diversity of crop on their farm. So this is on-farm diversity of crop. And that was followed by the hills and the plains. Further analysis shows that those people, those family farms who are self-sufficient, they maintain highest diversity of crops. So maintaining crop diversity and food self-sufficiency is directly related. So this was based on the analysis of 1500 households. And however, there was one exception from the hills. In the hills, when I look at the Shannon diversity for crop production, this relationship was not valid in the hill research site. The reason was, that was the region where they had commercial vegetable production. So the logic is, when they have access to modern technologies, when they have access to market, the crop diversity tend to go down. And then people would sell their produce to the market and then buy back food grains. So the food entitlement would be indirect. Whereas in the mountains, where they don't have access to modern technologies, when they don't have access to market, they would tend to produce food for their own sufficiency. So that is more of direct food entitlement, something like my parents' farm. When we didn't have access to modern technologies, when we don't have access to agriculture's extension system, we had to produce our own food. So the argument here is that the formal research and extension system that left some sort of flat land bias in Nepal. So they focus more on southern plains, more on productive areas. When we look at the pluralistic extension system in Nepal, we saw that civil society organizations and farmers organizations, they were trying to fill the gap. Well, you don't have research stations in the hills and mountains, it could be costly, so we would work directly with farmers, participatory variety improvement. Don't worry about building the structures, don't worry about putting the research stations. We'll work directly with the farmers. So that was the argument made by civil society organizations. And one farmer, he was working with the civil society scientists in participatory crop variety improvement. And he was not happy with the civil society scientists either, let alone the public scientists. Farmers were looking for some sort of crop variety, rice variety, that grows during dry season, but has the cooking quality of main season rice variety. So usually the dry season rice varieties doesn't taste good, doesn't taste better. So the farmers were looking at varieties that grows under dry season in limited water supply, but has the cooking quality of the main season rice. So that was the argument. And this particular farmer here, he developed, he was working with the civil society scientists, and without the knowledge of the scientists in the beginning, he snatched a handful of seed from the scientific experiment, and he started his own experiment. And you can imagine what could be the consequences for that particular farmer, stealing seed from the scientific experiment. He was not persecuted. It was happy ending. Scientists were more than happy to help him, and they gave him all sort of necessary technical support, and that farmer was able to develop 2 rice varieties that grows well under dry season cultivation, but has the cooking quality of the main season rice. So the argument is, when we engage the end users, we may come up with better technology. So now I am back to Canada, and this is my third and final example. In Canada as well as Ontario, the total number of farms are decreasing. And the rate of decrease of family farms are even faster. So the red lines here, so those are the number of family farms. So that has decreased more sharper than the total number of farms. There may be various reasons. One reason of a decrease in family farm would be the aging population, lack of succession planning. Earlier, when I asked you a question, many, like at least few of you have, you still have your family farm. Many farmers are losing their family farm, not being able to continue the work, or not having their children willing to continue their farming. So there may be various reasons. So my logic here to bring this is that I went to these kind of family farms in Ontario, conducted interviews and community workshops, and learned about the situation on the ground. And I had done that in my work with the Eastern Ontario Regional Network, Southwestern Ontario Integrated Fiber Technology. So that was the work I did in collaboration with Queen's University. And Swift and Huron, they are the two largest broadband initiatives in Ontario. And over again, I see that preservation of family farms is getting more challenging these days. And those farmers who are successful to maintain their family farm, they are increasing the portfolio of their income. I have one family farm here. They are a CSE farmer. They have over 40 members. They also run bed and breakfast for nature tourists. They are also publishers. They publish books and videos and some online materials. And they are off the grid. Besides farming, they also provide extension services to those who are interested in lifestyle change. So if you are interested in living off-grid or reducing our environmental footprint, they would be very happy to give the extension services. So how they ended up living in this kind of off-the-grid family farm in Tamworth? So moving to the countryside was a big decision for them. They were a young family back in late 90s. They used to live in Burlington. And when they moved to that location, they had two young kids, 10 and 12 years old daughters. And they moved there, their children had to go for homeschooling. When they are looking for those property to live in the countryside, they had 15 requirements, and I have 5 of them here. They are looking for at least 50 acres of land to cultivate, and they are looking for an area with 50 acres that has been already cultivated so that they could do their CSA gardening, and access to water, any type of water source, and some sort of heating so that they could survive the Canadian winter, and a good phone line. So back in late 1990s, connecting to the global village was something like the program of the Global South for them. So initially, they installed something called Optaphone, and that was kind of radio transmission to connect wirelessly to a tower, so that they could get connection to their phone and then run dial-up internet. So their speed was 14 kbps. After a few years, they moved to another technology called cellular unit. So another name for that is CDMA or GSM. So the benefit of cellular unit is they didn't have to pay the licensing fee. The Optaphone, that's the radio transmission, they had to pay the licensing fee for the government. Whereas the cellular unit, they didn't have to pay for that. And the cellular unit, they could browse the internet while talking on the phone. So they had dual band. And finally, they are lucky to install the wireless broadband. And initially, they had fixed cost of $3,000 to get that wireless, like satellite internet, and then they had to pay $300 a month. And in 2015, when I was there, they were paying $100 per month. So that was a huge relief for them. So my argument here is that those farmers, they told me that without internet, they won't live in this kind of rural village. So internet was a game changer for them, so that they could diversify their portfolio of incomes. Without internet, they couldn't connect to their members, CSA members. They couldn't do their digital publishing. So they couldn't market their bed and breakfast. So these days, in rural areas, high-speed internet is becoming an essential service. And this one is not the isolated case. Even to this day, 20% of the Canadians don't have reliable high-speed internet. Although the federal government had declared broadband service as an essential utility, just like any other utilities, we have about 20% of the population who don't have access to high-speed broadband internet. So we could have done more, so that those kind of farmers would make a better living in countryside. They could do a diversity of income portfolios. So this could be one way to promote multifunctional farming in countryside. So this is a map of the family farms from across the world. This was published in World Development, very reputed journal. And when I look at Canada, Canada has second lowest proportion of family farmers after New Zealand. So this verifies my earlier graph that shows the declining number of family farms in Ontario and Canada. For many people, preservation of family farms has become a controversial issue. I love talking about controversial issues. Many people argue that family farms are obstacle to development. This may be true if you look at from the perspective of employment and GDP, whereas other people may argue that that's not about the GDP and employment is not only about development. Development is more than GDP. So we may be looking at how those farmers are managing their livelihood. It may be more about food sovereignty, food self-sufficiency, and sustainable agricultural development. If you go beyond GDP as an indicator of development, we can still see that family farms are relevant to promote. When it comes to knowledge mobilization, I can see that there is a continuum from information exchange to knowledge brokering. So I have done work on mobile phones, social media, and here we have to be careful about using those tools is great, but sometimes we may tend to reinforce the status quo, the linear transfer of technology using those tools. So we have to be careful. We use those tools within the perspective of innovation system, so that the innovation actors could work as innovation brokers. The example is the Indian mango farmer. So he was promoting premium quality mangoes in domestic market. So he was a broker, innovation broker. And the Nepalese rice farmer, he developed his own rice varieties. That's another example of innovation broker. And the Canadian off-grid family farm. So the innovation brokers could be the individuals, that could be organization. So in many countries, there has been a growth of private extension using the environment of pluralistic extension system, decentralization, privatization, liberalization. So that gave rise to private extension. And those private extension providers, they tend to serve larger farmers. And the smallholder family farms that I described in my talk, they are like in some ways left behind. So if we were to help them, there may be ways to redefine the scope of extension. And there are many ways, but I would like to propose 4 major ways. The first is promotion of multifunctional farms. Second one is mechanization of family farms. The mainstream mechanization paradigm is not helpful for those family farms. They can't afford, or they may not adopt those bigger machines, combines and harvesters. And we need small tools, small machines, and digital technologies that help the family farms. And another one would be adaptation to climate change. And the final one I would like to propose is science for social responsibilities. So we have new and emerging, often controversial technologies. And the consumers, they need unbiased information from the public sources, independent sources, so that they can make an informed decision to use those technology and produce. So information from different stakeholders may come as a mixed message for those consumers. So in my third section, I'd like to give some indication of where my research will lead in future. The first one here, I have worked with the Oral Food Institute, different NGOs, civil society organizations in biodiversity conservation, in agroecological farming, new and emerging technologies, digital technologies, and I have published many papers on that. And recently we submitted a project to SERC to work on underutilized crop among indigenous communities in Canada and Nepal. So we see that there are common issues around capacity building for the utilization of underutilized crops among indigenous communities. So in Canada, the example of those crops would be wild rice, and in Nepal that would be buckwheat and minor millet. And the second would be, I have been working with Old Ochre based in NGO based in Waterloo, and they have been working in Nepal. And then I am going to use my Canadian experience of working in broadband and social media to work in Nepal in collaboration with Old Ochre and Nepalese NGOs. So I am on the advisory board of Old Ochre, and then we have other members from University of Waterloo, Wolf Laurea, and Ontario Council for International Cooperation. So we have been also talking about developing future project around this line. And the third one is I received funding from the office of the provost academic to conduct research on teaching science for social responsibility. So when we are talking about controversial issues, so what would be the right pedagogy to introduce that in class? So my argument is when we bring controversial issues in class, that help develop critical thinking and analytical skill among students. And I attended Course Redesign Institute conducted by OpenAid, and I'm also going to facilitate a workshop in May in the Teaching and Learning Conference. And then I'm also on the organizing committee of an international conference on teaching and learning. It's being held in UFT in July. So these are only some indication of my future research interests, and these research interests are within the scope of University of Guelph's research plan, and that also fits well into the future challenge areas of SERC. So my students, they often ask me how it was like growing up on a family farm. And my short answer is that shaped the way I look at extension and capacity building in the 21st century. And then my teaching is based on, training the whole person that has been mentioned in the university's path forward document. And as Mahatma Gandhi said, be the change you want to see in the world. So that is my main philosophical, motto in teaching. I have taught many courses, graduate and undergraduate courses, and they include extension theories, capacity development, case studies, development practice, project management, and research methods. And these courses include 4 of the CTE courses. so I am quite familiar with the course teaching requirement of CTE program. And students have consistently evaluated my teaching at a high standard, and that I believe that is because of the way I impart critical thinking and analytical skill in my class. So when I design my courses, I have designed 2 brand new courses and redesigned 7 existing courses. When I design my courses, I look at 3 elements: the learning outcomes, that drives everything that I do in my class, and then the learning objective and the assessment methods. So when I formulate my learning objectives, I usually refer to Bloom's taxonomy of educational objectives. So that has a hierarchy of objectives from recalling facts to creating new ideas. And the class activities include group work, critical thinking, case studies, class presentation, discussion and debate. Of course, I have a limited traditional style lectures. In my assignments, I scaffold my assignment at 2 levels. So one assignment would contribute to other assignment. For example, I have critical reviews of journal articles, and then I also have a literature review paper. So the skills the students learn from that critical review would contribute to the literature review. So that is kind of scaffolding between 2 or 3 different assignments. The second level of scaffolding is I ask my students to submit their outline. For example, if they are writing a case study, they have to submit me 1-page outline of their case study. Of course, a small grade attached to that, about 5 points. And then they submit that to me. I give them feedback, and then based on the outline, I invite them to discuss their proposal in class, and then they write the final paper based on that. And then when when students do group work in my class, what I do is I ask them to submit an outline, and then I give feedback. So they keep working on that project, and they need to present in class, and based on the class feedback, they write the final paper. So it's kind of not waiting to the final deadline. They keep building on that, and then I build that into my class learning activities. So I don't leave them independent. All the time they are in constant interaction with me. So in conclusion, I had lifelong commitment in capacity development, extension and innovation. So I work in academia as well as extension practice. I work as extension practitioners with the government departments, civil society organizations, small private organizations like farmers organizations. So I had diverse experience from academia as well as the extension practice. I have secured funding, conducted research, and published articles. Most of them are in highly influential journals. And those research I have conducted in developing country like Nepal, emerging country like India, and developed country like Canada. So I can bring a global perspective in research and teaching. I have developed and taught very successful graduate and undergraduate courses, and I deliver them in class, online, and in blended platforms. And I am comfortable with the theoretical material as well as applied material. And then I bring, my teaching has been influenced by theory as well as practice. Thank you so much. I would be very happy to answer your questions. Thank you.
So we still have time for some questions. Who wants to start us off? Yes, sir.
Thank you very much, sir. I've been thrilled and impressed with your presentation. You have a wide range of experience when it comes to actual extension. You started with the actual innovation system, critical innovation system, rise technology. The last aspect that is now on the globe, the CDD approach to development, being promoted by the World Bank, IFAD and others. You have not talked about that. What's your own take about that? How do you reconcile pluralistic extension with the CDD approach to development? That's one. Two, based on your experience in Canada, sir, I want to ask you this question that if the family farming is decreasing, what is the place of that family farms in the Ontario local food strategy? We need to look at it because the OMAFRA has a program, Ontario Food Strategy. They've started since 2003. They enacted the law in 2013. So it's on using different initiatives. So with this, your presentation, I begin to get that now. What we want to look at now is what is the place of the family farms in the Ontario local food strategy? That's another one. The last one I want to ask now is that all those are internet, optophone system, cellular unit, broadband, those three systems. Who were the service provider providing that, those facilities when it was operational?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let me answer that one by one. CCD, the community-driven development. So in international development, we play around different terminology. And sometimes we may be referring to the same idea. So if I could refer that to my talk here, participatory technology development, when we engage local communities in the technology development process, can you call that community-driven development? We could. And then if we talk about Indian mango farmers, promotion of farmers organization, can you call it community-driven development? We play around different terminologies and we have to be careful what we are referring to and in what context. And context matters. And your second question about the public support on family farming. In 2013, OMAFRA, they came up with the Local Food Act. That was a big improvement from the public sector. And they have done a lot of work on that. I'm not saying that there is not initiative from the public sector. My argument is, could we do more? So what could be the best way to promote those family farms? So we have a very grim scenario of family farmers in Ontario. We are the second lowest in that aspect after New Zealand. So, people who are interested in family farming, we may develop research around those issues. Why family farming is decreasing in Canada? Is there any way? Is it still controversial? Are we talking about just GDP, or we are also interested in biodiversity, local landscapes, sustainability, livelihood? So what we are interested here? So your third one is about internet. So my argument here is that when people don't have access to technology, they try to use whatever available. In developing countries, this kind of happens all the time. And In Canada as well, we have seen some examples of those challenges, particularly in broadband. That's partly because of the size of the country, partly because of the geography of the country. You know, if we were like Netherlands, we would not have that kind of problem. You know, we could drive in few hours from coast to coast, but here it's not possible. And we have huge northern communities, and those communities are always left behind. Not only because of our willingness to help them, because of the challenges that have been provided by the geography and the landscape. Did I answer your question?
Questions? Oh.
Yeah, thanks for that, Laxmi. Our program, you're a bit familiar with it. We're a pretty small faculty, three of us. Most of your work's been done in the area of agriculture, and that seems to be where your interests lie. Our students have very diverse interests. What other areas would you feel comfortable in supervising graduate students in the CBE program other than agriculture and food related?
You know, I would recognize myself as innovation guy, and in my research, the opportunity I had was to work with farmers. So the innovation system perspective, institutional innovation, social innovation, that applies to many other fields. And even the concept of extension is not, foreign to other sectors. For example, in health sector, public health, they have extension. So using my expertise and broad training from different discipline, the interdisciplinary training, I would be very happy to guide students who are interested in innovation, and they could bring examples from any sector. So innovation from agriculture, innovation from public health, innovation from broadband, or even some emerging technologies. So when I talk about innovation, it's very cross-cutting. And then I have done work in knowledge mobilization, I have done work in knowledge commons, so that gives a broader perspective in the type of work I can help students.
John Fitzgibbon.
My observation is that there are two trends in agriculture in Canada. One of them is getting bigger and bigger. In Ontario right now, I think the average farm-owned land is somewhere close to 1,000 acres. Average farm, say cash crop, they can't make a living on less than 2,500 acres. 70% of our agricultural products are exported. So that's a major part of it, and structurally, it is largely because of our tax law. The family farm has become the family corporation. How does that context fit in with your view of innovation and change in agriculture?
When I talk about innovation, I recognize innovation with at least two pathways. As I said earlier, I can see the third paradigm shift in innovation. So that would be the incremental innovation and transformational innovation. So those incremental innovation could be innovation within the incumbent regime. So we may be making small changes, we may be coming up with new laws, bylaws that improve the situation over time. That's great. But sometimes when we have problems like the decline of family farms, or decline of smallholder family farms, I would rather say.
Okay, what do you do with that?
Yeah, in that situation, if we talk that from global perspective, we may need some sort of transformational innovation. So that transformational innovation could come from the local communities, that could come from the end users, and that could compete with the mainstream thinking, and that could be one way to look at how we can improve our living.
Any other questions? Joe Devlin.
Laxmi, thanks for the presentation. Very interesting cases. You've talked about pluralistic extension, which I like. I think that's a very interesting idea. And you note that there has been a substantial privatization of extension, especially in developed countries, but increasingly in the global south as well. So if we imagine that a lot of those who are trained in extension might be going into private sector extension, my question to you is that the product that capacity development and extension should be concerned to be generating? In other words, is the track out of capacity and development as capacity and extension into private sector extension, or is it into other pathways? What do you see as sort of the primary career paths that graduates of CDE might take, and that you would have a responsibility for supporting and encouraging?
I'm glad you brought this issue. I have one cartoon here. This is from our Dodge colleague. And this cartoon talks about the private extension, and the customers are asking, is there any discount for public good? I would say in short answer, it could be a balance of both. When we have a larger private sector, we can't discount that from our reality. So my argument is that we need to train our students with critical thinking and analytical skills, that there is at least different ways to think about what has been happening. So private extension, in most cases, it has been very successful. Something like technology transfer, that was very successful, but that also came with social and environmental cost. So when we are talking about training our students, we have to be balancing our, teaching practice. So that's one of the reasons I look at my research on teaching science for social responsibilities. That includes controversial issues. So family farming, privatization of extension, this has been a controversial issue, I would say. There is no fact about this. And then when we are teaching controversial issues, my question, I usually ask myself, do we disclose our values? Do we disclose our own position on those kind of controversial issues when we are teaching our students? And then I ask my student, what do you think? When I'm teaching the controversial issue today, would you like me to disclose my values, my position on this, or you are okay if I remain neutral on this issue? And then sometimes students come and told me that, we are more smarter than you think. We already know your values. There is no way to remain neutral in those kind of issues. And then another argument is that when those controversial issues are very important for the society as a public good, academics as well as researchers may also have the social responsibility to advocate for that. So being neutral and not advocating either of the situation would be a loss for the society. So my main argument here is that we need to think about the greater good and the public good of those actions we take in our classroom, we take in our research as well as community engagement. So it's a very critical, very sensitive issue, and our students should have the knowledge of all the perspective of those issues.
Yeah, one more question, and I apologize if I got it wrong, Laxmi. I think when you were talking about your teaching philosophy, did you say that it's training the whole person? Or did I catch it right? Or?
Yeah, that is from the path forward from our university. So university, they came up with the idea of teaching whole person. That may be the selling point for the university, and I agree with that. Teaching only the technical skills would limit our students' critical thinking ability. So we may need to teach them some soft skills, some ethical values, moral values, particularly when it comes to those kind of controversial issues, so that we can train them as a responsible citizen, we can develop responsible technology, and we can practice responsible research and innovation. So that was my point.
Okay, so what does that look like in the classroom then? So I guess what I want to know is, what does teaching to the whole person mean to you, not to the university, but to you?
For me, it's more of not just teaching the technical skills, but also teaching soft skills. Bringing some controversial issues in a debate in class, so that we can identify different dimensions of that issue, so that we can do the deep thinking to understand what is the stake in that particular issue.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Laxmi? John?
Pretty simple question. Do faculty at a university owe a duty of service directly to the communities of interest?
It's a very interesting question. I came up with this kind of argument before as well. When I was talking with my colleague from Northern Arizona State University, they asked me, are you a scholar or practitioner? And then they were saying that they have some scholar activist. I don't know what that means. These days, there is a very vocal group of academics who is identifying them as scholar activists. And that links to my argument here. If those kind of interests, public interests, are so important for the society, for the greater good, as a public good, we may have to advocate those kind of issues. Otherwise, we may not like to be in that kind of controversy. So there's a thin line, there's a borderline between whether we do that or not. But some academics, they feel comfortable to work on, to engage in those kind of public interest issues. And I personally think that if that's for the greater good, if that's for the public good, then we may need to advocate what we think is the right, based on the evidence. So without evidence, we could not talk about those things.
Anyone else? We're getting to the end here. There's no further questions. Thank you very much, Laxmi.